Okay, this video is on in class practice for differentiation number 5, where we're actually sketching a graph of a function. Oh, sorry about that. Sketching the graph of a function for g for which we have the following clues. So I'm going to go through each one of these clues with you till you see what they are, and then you can use them. Before I start, I just want you to remind you of what your notes were, that if you have an original function f of x, okay, if I have my function as either increasing or decreasing, how we find that information is usually that's our f prime of x. And because these are our slopes, I just didn't want you to forget that. And if I have my original function f of x, and then I talk about if it's concave up or concave down, and it's like concave up like a cup, down like a frown, that's usually we're using f double prime of x. Tells us our concavity. Other vocabulary you might see is when we're talking about the points where the slope is 0, we call those critical points. And critical points are happening at your max and your mins, or maximum minimums, because f prime of x is equal to 0. That's where your turning points are. And then you'll see something like this called inflection points. And this is where the change in concavity happens. And we're going to deal with this more later this year, but I just wanted you to see where they came from. And by the way, this is when f double prime of x is equal to 0. So this is just a little background that we'll be practicing later this year, but I wanted to make sure that you had some of the vocabulary so you can see this. All right. So the first thing I'm going to look at is when they ask me to sketch a graph. So I'm going to do this in purple here. So I'm going to sketch a graph for this function g. And the first thing I do is I look at everything and I try to figure out the clues. So this first part where it says g of o equals g of t, g of 2 equals g of 4 equals 0, they basically told me the points on the graph because there's no prime or double prime. So it's a point 0, 0, because g of o is 0. G of 2 is 0, so 2, 0. And g of 4 is 0, so it's a 0.40. So those are actual points on my graph. That's important for you to know because these kind of keep you grounded and you know where everything is. The next clue they told me, whoa, what did I just hit? Sorry about that, guys. So the next point they told me was g prime of 1, okay, g prime of 1, g prime of 3 equals 0. Well, that's our first derivative, and if you remember, our first derivative tells me about slopes. They just basically told us where the maximum or mins of our graph are, or turning points on the graph, okay? Here it says g prime of 0 and g prime of 4. That means at the x is 0 and 4, the slope is 1, so it's going to go this way. Then they said g prime of 2, so they're telling you at 2, the slope is negative 1. So that's going to be this way. So here's a positive 1 slope, here's a negative 1 slope. And then they told us the limit as x approaches infinity. So as I go to the right of this function, it approaches infinity. So basically they're telling you your right tail is going to go up. Okay? And here it says the limit as x goes to negative infinity of this function, meaning if I go to the left, my tail is going to go down. So I'm going to use all these clues, and I don't want you to get discouraged, and it's actually better if you shut this off right now and see if you can sketch it after I give you some clues how to start. So the first thing what I would do is always put your points on the graph. And the other thing is we had 2s, 0, 2, 4, 1, and 3. We basically just had those points. So I set up my graph because they only talked about 1, 2, 3, 4. So I set up my graph. And then I'm going to actually put my points on. So my point is 0, 0, because they told us that. So I'm going to put that on my graph. The other point they told us was 2, 0. That's on my graph. And the other point they told me was 4, 0. So now I have to go through and do everything else they said. So when I look at g prime of 1 and g prime of 3, they told us there's turning points there, or min and max. So I know at 1, in 3, it's going to either curve up here or down here, up here or down here. There's going to be a turning point. But before I do that, and a lot of times you got to practice this, is I look at my end tails, and it says when I go to the left, it's going to go to negative infinity. So I'm going to kind of come down here because they said it's going to go to the left. And they said at 1, it's going to have a turning point or slope of 0. So I'm going to kind of go like this. And then I know it has to come down through 2 because this point's here. So I'm going to come down through 2. Then they said at 3, I also have another turning point. So I'm going to come down here. And then I have to go through this point at 4. And then it said it's going to go to infinity after that. So that's how I sketch it. Now, basically, when I do this, guys, I actually go through and mark them off as I do each one. So the ones I didn't check was at g prime of 0 and 4, the slope is 1. So g prime of 0, this is a slope of 1. And at 4, it's a slope of 1. So I did okay. So I'm checking that. So I did that. And then I said g prime of 2 is negative 1. The slope, and that looks like a negative 1 slope. So it looks like I did okay. But I don't want you to think that you need to know this right off the bat. Sometimes you sketch and you have to erase and practice. This one gave us a plenty of points, so it kind of helped me. And they told me where my tails were going to go, so it kind of helped me do that. So you should always shut this off, see if you can do it, and then check and see how you did. So that's all there is for number 5. And I'll do videos for the other practice ones we did in class as well.